My name is Christina. I'm here at the Brooklyn Bridge Park Environmental Education Center. And today we're going to be talking about woodlands. That's the theme for the month. And we're going to learn a little bit about this special habitat that you can actually find all throughout New York City. So what is a woodland? So woodlands and forests, those words kind of get used interchangeably, and they're basically a type of terrestrial habitat where you have a dense layer of vegetation. So when I say the word vegetation, what I mean is a lot of different types of plants, big trees, shrubs, flowering plants, all of those different things combined with other natural elements like soil, rocks, and then of course animals. So we're going to dive into a lot of those different parts, items and things that we see in the woodlands. But first, I wanted to point out that New York City has a lot of cool forest areas that you might not realize. In Staten Island, there are some great forest ecosystems. In the Bronx, certainly all throughout Long Island. And then in these more urbanized areas, Brooklyn, Manhattan, we see smaller versions of this. So in Brooklyn Bridge Park, for example, we see some woodland gardens, as we like to call them, and they're basically forest edge ecosystems. So what that means is they the diversity of plants and the animals that live there is very similar to a forest or to the edge of what a forest would look like, and it kind of echoes just a little bit of what you might see in a forest. So there are smaller kind of micro habitats of woodlands and forests in some of our smaller parks, including Prospect Park 2, Central Park. So let's talk about these different vegetation layers. When we talk about forests, we tend to talk about the different heights at which you see things, kind of similar to in a rainforest, you talk about different layers. So we're going to use this diagram up here. So the first layer, the tallest layer, we tend to call the canopy layer. So those are the trees that are really, really tall and at the very top. A lot of animals aren't going to be able to reach the canopy unless they have some wings, right? So our bigger birds, like a hawk, might fly overhead and perhaps land on the tippy topmost branch in the canopy trees. Other animals that are really good at climbing might get pretty close too. We see some woodpeckers in the park, and they'll just climb up the bark on the side. And the next layer, a little bit shorter than that, there's going to be another set of trees that make up the understory. Now, the understory has a lot of space for animals that want to climb and want to perch, and it's a little easier than climbing up to what's considered the canopy all the way at the top. So you'll see a lot more birds in that landscape. You'll see smaller birds there, ones that can't necessarily get up that high. They'll be perching. They'll be perching on some of the lower branches. You might see things like squirrels. So the understory is where you're going to see a lot more animal life, because you can see what's hanging out in the understory. You might need some binoculars to help you, but it'll be a lot easier to tell what's there than trying to look all the way up at the canopy layer. So the next shortest layer is the shrub layer. So shrubs are very low types of vegetation. Sometimes they almost look like mini trees, but they're different classification than trees. And they're very lightweight, so they let lightweight animals kind of rest and retreat within there. So a lot of times you'll see some spiders making some webs in the shrub layers. You might also see a lot of lightweight insects like this guy. If you've been to our education center, you know the mantises quite well. We see those all throughout the park. They're hanging out on those low shrubs, camouflaging really, really well. A lot of insects laying their eggs there, nibbling on some leaves for food. And then once you get all the way to the floor of the forest, forest ground. We call that ground cover because there's kind of a little bit of a dense layer of stuff, not below the ground, not in the dirt, but just above where you're walking through with your feet. You'll see tons of rocks, tons of short grasses, tons of leaves. If you've noticed when you walk through Brooklyn Bridge Park, through Pier 1 where we have that woodland habitat, a lot of the areas where we have our vegetation have layers of leaves all throughout the year. Those create something called the duff layer, very important, helps add nutrients back into our woodland soils, and it provides more hiding space for animals too. So you'll see more and more little invertebrate creatures like snails, slugs, insects. I'm going to go ahead and add a slug here by our ground cover. Something else you might tend to see in woodlands, especially if there is some water nearby, are this animal. Now, we haven't seen them yet in Brooklyn Bridge Park because we have a fairly new park, but things like frogs and newts, a lot of them that are local to New York, can be found in the forest, especially around this time of year. They will be migrating back towards water so they can lay their eggs. So if you're walking through the forest and turn over some rocks, it's likely that you might see some newts there around the ground cover. And then, of course, lastly, there is our soil or root layer down the very bottom. So this is deep underground. You'd have to dig to get there. And if you've ever gotten to dig in the ground in your gardens, you'll probably know that you'll find tons of these guys, earthworms, and this guy, not a worm, a millipede. So you have some of these other creatures, also considered part of the woodland forest habitat that you might not necessarily be able to see as you're walking through. So that's just a brief kind of overview of all of these different vegetation layers and some examples of some of the animals that you might find in them. We're going to take a deep dive in a second with my friend Haley, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about some of the mammals and other woodland creatures that we normally find in woodland habitats. We're going to learn a little bit about some of the things that we might find while we're outside exploring, even if we don't actually see a living animal walking by, some other signs that maybe are left behind. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Haley, and she's going to show us some really cool objects.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So when we talk about woodlands here in the Education Center, it's our opportunity to learn a little bit more about the mammals that are found in the park and also throughout New York City and New York State. And when I start to talk about animals, or mammals particularly, we all know some things about mammals. They have fur on their body, they're warm-blooded. We ourselves are mammals, but the wild mammals that live out in nature, we like to categorize them based a lot on their teeth. And I have some pretty cool skulls to show you here today. So I have 3 different skulls, and they're from 3 different families of mammals or orders of mammals. One is a herbivore, so that's a mammal that only eats plants, and its teeth are specific for the type of plants that it eats. One is a carnivore, so a carnivore is an animal that only eats other animals, and the teeth on this skull are definitely evolved to be able to cut and rip through flesh. And then the other skull is a mammal that is an omnivore. So an omnivore is an animal that eats both plants and sometimes other animals. So their teeth might be like a combination between some of the others. So let's first take a look at this skull on the top. It's a small skull, and it has really long front teeth. Check out those teeth and look at what color they are. they're bright orange. Isn't that crazy? So this, you may have guessed if you've seen some other animals with really long teeth like that. This is a muskrat. So it's a type of rodent. And rodents always have those really long front teeth on the top and the bottom. So muskrats are very similar to beavers, and they're going to eat similar food. And those two types of rodents, they're big rodents, they like to eat the living layer of a piece of a tree, like a stick or the trunk. The living layer is between the wood that's on the inside and the bark that's on the outside. So they're going to use those teeth to scrape away, peel away this bark layer, and underneath that, if this piece of the plant were still alive, there would be a living layer between the bark and the wood. That's what they like to eat. So they're not actually eating the wood. There's not really much nutrients in wood itself. So they want to eat the layer between that. And you can often find signs of that there have been muskrats or beavers around if you see a stick in the woods that has like those little teeth marks in it. So that's a good way to tell that there are muskrats or beavers living in that area. The next skull I want to show you is an omnivore. So this one's a little bit from an animal that's a little bit bigger. Check out those teeth there. They may remind you of if you have a dog at home, similar teeth. So dogs are actually omnivores too. They like to eat some plant material and other animals as well. So those front teeth are going to help them for eating other animals, the flesh of other animals, but those back teeth are going to help them grind up plant material like our molars and our teeth. We're omnivores too, right? Most people are omnivores. This is a skull. Ooh, there we go. This is a skull from a raccoon. Can you believe that? So we can see where the eyes were in the front. So oftentimes animals that eat other animals are going to have their eyes facing forward so they can find their prey. Raccoons are kind of in between being on the side of their head. I don't know. We could tell from the muskrat, their eye holes are much more to the sides of their head. Actually, muskrats and beavers have interesting skulls because they spend so much time in the water. Instead of like the shape of think of like a mouse or a rat, their face is going to be really pointy and their eyes are going to be over here on the side. A muskrat and a beaver spend a lot of time in the water, so their eyes are kind of like up on the top of their head. So when they're swimming in the water, they can look up. And yeah, the raccoon's eyes are right there in the front, well, sort of to the front, in between the front and being totally on the side. We can see where its nose used to be, that big hole in the middle. Very cool. So that's a skull from an omnivore. This is a skull from a carnivore. Check out those teeth. Check out where the eyes were, like I was saying, right in the front. This might remind you of an animal's face or the teeth if you have a cat at home. So not too many molars, only a few teeth in the back, but really strong long front teeth. This is the skull from a bobcat. And bobcats, actually, I just learned the other day that the first report, well, maybe not the first, but there is now a bobcat living within New York City limits in the Bronx. So we used to say that bobcats have been found outside of the city, but things change and animals adapt and start to move into urban areas, and we have to adjust to be able to live with them as well. And New York City has some really great information about all of your wildlife neighbors that are living right here in the city limits as well. And bobcats are a new resident here with us. So check out the features of that skull. Very cool. Christina's gonna share a slide with us on the screen that's gonna show us a little bit more about mammal teeth and jaws. So here's what I'm talking about. Mammal teeth are so important for scientists to figure out how to categorize them, which groups of mammals belong together based on their teeth and skull shape. And here we see some pretty interesting groups, maybe some things we've talked about already, like the rodents up there at the top, all the animals with those really long front teeth. Another group that's very special, bats, Chyoptera. So those, actually, that's a fruit bat. They have interesting teeth for chewing and eating fruit. And then some other really cool ones on there, and you can see the skull and teeth of a deer. So that's definitely a herbivore, right? We know that deers like to eat leaves, and they have all of those molars for grinding up the leaves. Let me see, what's this one on the bottom? Ooh, an anteater on the bottom. So anteaters and the group of mammals in that group are really interesting. They don't really need teeth. They use their tongue, really long tongues, to slurp up ants. And then carnivores, they're in the middle, so those are going to be things like dogs and bears and stuff like that. And then primates down at the bottom. People are primates, so that skull is starting to look a little similar to a human skull, right? And then all the aquatic mammals, the mammals that spend their whole life in the ocean, the cetaceans. So those are whales and dolphins and porpoises, have really sharp rows of pointy teeth, but they're small teeth. So they basically need those to grab and hold on to a fish that might be escaping, but then they mostly just swallow their prey whole. Very cool. So those are some ways that you can tell different groups of mammals apart based on their teeth, and also tell what they like to eat. But some other ways that we can tell that, besides finding bones, or like I said, like if we saw a beaver left its part of its food behind, we would see like the teeth marks in the sticks and things, or on the trunks of trees and things like that. But we also might know that mammals are in the area because we might find other parts of their body. These are a couple of antlers. I bet you guys know what animals grow antlers around this area. These are from some deer, and actually on this antler, it's crazy, there is a little bit of hair still left on that antler. Very cool. So these are not made of bone. Antlers regrow every year. It's pretty crazy. They lose their antlers in the spring or in the fall, and then in the spring they'll grow back even bigger. As they're growing, they get a new set of antlers, and they grow bigger every year. I believe so. Different types of deer in different places. Sometimes the females will grow horn or antlers, but I think in this area, the white-tailed deer that we see, only the males grow these antlers. So you might find antler sheds in woodland habitats, and that's a sign that there's deer around. I mean, I guarantee you, if you go to any forest around New York and you start looking, you will find antlers out there, because there are so many deer in the forests around here for sure. And in New York City, in places like Staten Island and the Bronx, there's definitely deer living out there. And another thing that you might find are some footprints. So Christina's going to show some things under our microscope that are pretty interesting. Can we zoom out a little bit? So this is a mold made from a footprint, or a cast made from a footprint that was found from, this is a raccoon footprint. Yeah, so we saw the raccoon skull, now we're looking at the raccoon footprint. So if you're walking around in like the dirt, or especially it just snowed a lot recently, and the snow was on the ground for a long time, so we actually found a lot of different animal footprints out in the snow. You might be lucky and find some footprints. And footprints can tell a lot about what type of animal it is. We know this is a raccoon footprint because raccoons actually have hands kind of similar to ours. They have kind of opposable thumb digit down here, but they also have claws. So if we were looking at a dog footprint versus a cat footprint, they might look really similar, but the dog's footprint is always going to have claw impressions, and a cat footprint is not, because cats, if you have one at home, you know they're able to retract their claws into their foot. So when they step, they don't leave that mark there. I think we have another footprint to look at. What little foot is that? It looks like a human foot, but like longer, right? And look at how long those toes are. So this is a very, very common woodland animal that we see all over the city. I'm sure you've seen one before. This is a squirrel footprint. I believe the back foot of a squirrel. So their front paws are smaller and shorter, but their back paws are longer like that. You can even see just a little bit of the claws there as well. Speaking of claws, we do have some claws from a mammal. So these were taken from a mammal definitely after it died. And sometimes we collect things from people that have found animals that have died, and that's how we got these claws. So we didn't go out and kill this animal. We just sometimes end up with body parts because an animal dies naturally, and then you can take pieces of it and look at it for a long time. These are fox claws. Look at how long and sharp those are. Pretty cool. So claws can't, just like our nails, if an animal is injured or something, a piece of its claw might break off, or ouch, maybe the whole thing would break off, I don't know. So you could end up finding some claws out in the forest as well if you're looking carefully, and that's another sign that there are mammals around. Now, I want to talk about fur. So we know that mammals are definitely all those animals that have fur or hair on their bodies. And I have a couple of pelts here. These are not real. These are from a company called Kind Furs, or Kind Pelts. And they make some replicas of animal pelts. And these are 4 different replicas of animal pelts that you would, from animals that you would find living in this area. Let's start with this one. I bet you guys all know what kind of animal has fur like this. Yeah, this is a skunk. So skunks can be found in New York City. We haven't seen any in Brooklyn. They need a little more space, so you might see them in Staten Island or the Bronx or somewhere like that, or just outside of the city as well. So skunks have thick, long, fluffy fur, and definitely have interesting patterning on it, right? So this is an animal, I bet you guys, if you know one thing about skunks, you know that they're known for being stinky, right? So creating that spray that smells bad is a defense mechanism. And these very drastic fur coloration, the stripes, are warning other animals that you don't want to mess with a skunk or you're going to end up sorry and stinky, right? Other animals have fur that is really great for camouflaging, for blending in. This next one is also a type of mammal that you might find living in New York City, but probably in the more wooded areas, the outskirts, same sort of areas you would find a skunk. This is from a red fox. So red fox have very thick, very soft fur, and definitely the coloring helps them blend in. They want to blend in with their surroundings, not so they can stay safe from predators, although, I mean, maybe if a coyote was around, they would want to hide from a coyote, but they're predators themselves, so they want to hide from their prey so they can sneak up on their prey. So that's how camouflage helps predators. And then these other 2 are from smaller prey animals. This one is from a cotton-tailed rabbit, and those are pretty common in New York City, definitely in some larger parks like Prospect Park or Central Park, you might find rabbits living there. Great camouflaging colors, super soft fur, a little shorter than some of those others we saw. And then this is a replica of a squirrel's coat. So gray squirrels in New York City can actually vary in their colors, I think, more than other places. I had never seen a black squirrel before I moved here, and most of them are gray, but sometimes they can be black as well. So this one actually is a little bit darker than I think most of the squirrels that I see, but yeah, they can have a little bit of variation in their color. Some are a little bit more brown, combination of brown and gray. So gray squirrels, their coats help them camouflage. And if you've ever seen this squirrel hanging out on the trunk of a tree, they'll lay their body really flat and spread out, and they can blend in really well with the bark of trees in this area. So that's how their camouflage helps them survive. All mammals have fur to help keep their bodies warm. They have to keep their bodies temperature high all the time because they have a pretty high metabolism. They're burning a lot of energy. And that's another reason why mammals have to eat a lot more often than some other animals like fish and reptiles, and amphibians can actually go a pretty long time without eating compared to mammals, but they're going to have to eat every day. And this fur helps their body stay warm so they don't lose too much energy. So those are some cool things about fur. Now I want to show you this really interesting version of fur from a mammal that is found in New York State. If you go out of the city, upstate, you're going to find this mammal living there. Look at what we're looking at under the microscope here. Now I said this was fur. This does not look like any of the fur we've looked at so far. There are a few pieces of hair in there behind it. These are quills. Now, what kind of mammal lives upstate and has quills? It also has fur on its body. If you're thinking porcupine, you're right. These are quills. Actually, I think these quills that we have are from African porcupines, but they're very, very similar to North American porcupines. Porcupines are another type of rodent, so they're going to have the same teeth, and also their teeth are orange, just like the muskrat and the beaver. But they like to hang out in the trees. Look at this porcupine climbing the trees. They have really sharp claws, and they make them really great at climbing trees. They also like to eat the same thing, so they have those teeth so they can scrape away the bark and eat the living layer between the bark and the wood. But they also like to eat other fruit and vegetables as well. Porcupines go crazy for fruit, I'll tell you. I've seen lots of videos of porcupines eating fruit, and they get so excited. But this picture on the bottom is a blown up picture of that quill. So you might know that you don't want to mess with a porcupine, or you're going to end up with those quills stuck in your body. And they have these barbs running down them so that they can, once they go in, it's very hard to get them out. And if you have a dog that encounters a porcupine, you definitely want to keep it away, because you're going to have to go to the vet, and they're going to have to take all those quills out carefully if they encountered a porcupine and the porcupine was being defensive, might end up with an injured pet. But porcupines are really cool, interesting rodents, but we don't find them in Brooklyn Bridge Park. So I don't think we would find any of these quills laying around. Quills are just modified hairs. They're made out of the same material as hair and fingernails and claws, are all made out of the same thing, and they do shed and grow new ones over time. And it's just a really interesting example of a weird type of hair. So I want to show you some pictures of some mammals that we can find here in Brooklyn Bridge Park and have been seen from time to time. Christina's just going to come over here. This next picture is a raccoon. Look at those cute raccoons. That's a picture that was taken in Prospect Park, and this picture of the footprint was taken here in Brooklyn Bridge Park. So we know that raccoons are around this area and have been hanging out in the park, but they haven't completely moved in. But I bet you in the next few years, we'll start to see more and more raccoons in this area, because we're not too far from Prospect Park, where there's those two very cute raccoons are hanging out. Raccoons, you may know, are nocturnal. You may have heard that raccoons are nocturnal. They like to come out at night. They're actually, this is a cool word, crepuscular. Crepuscular means an animal that is active at dawn and dusk. So just as the sun is setting and just as the sun is coming up, you will find raccoons venturing down from the trees where they sleep. So those raccoons this is daylight, so they were probably sleeping and hanging out in the safety of the trees for the day. And then they venture down as it starts to get dark to look for food. Ooh, definitely a nocturnal animal. Although someone found on iNaturalist this picture of this bat flying in the daytime. Maybe the coloring was just a little off or something, and it was probably right as the sun was going down. That's my guess. So bats will sleep all day, and they come out just as the sun starts to go down, leaving their sleeping spots. Some of them might be sleeping in trees. I bet you all hear that bats live in caves. Well, yeah, if caves are around in your area, you'll definitely probably find bats in the forests and caves, but they'll pretty much take whatever dark, safe place they can find, and sometimes that ends up being a tree as well. So this is an eastern red bat, and they're the most common ones that we find around here. We've definitely found some in the park and seen them flying around as the sun starts to go down. Oh, bats are the only flying mammal. Very, very special group of mammals. And actually, if you look at their wings, imagine your finger bones are really, really long. So their arm bones are really short up next to their body, but their finger bones are really long and have webbing in between. That's their wings. Isn't that crazy? They fly with their fingers. Oh yes, rats and mice, probably the most common mammal we see. Christina, would you mind getting my water? Sorry. The most common mammal we see in Brooklyn Bridge Park, for sure. Rats and mice. Rodents that like to eat. They eat leftover food that people leave around. Rodents are, nothing to be scared of. I mean, any animal, you're going to want to give it, wild animal, you're going to want to give it its distance. Don't antagonize it, because they're just trying to live their lives. And rats and mice want to live in parks and enjoy the habitat just like we do. And so eventually we're going to encounter them sometimes. I mean, rats are extremely adaptive animals, and they've been able to adapt and live in urban environments in places that no other animal wants to live, like in the subways and underground and things. But if they had their choice, if there were more open space, they would definitely probably want to live there more. So rats, I think they're pretty cool, and they should be respected just like any other animal. And another rodent, one of the most common ones as well, squirrels. And here's this black squirrel that I was talking about. I see them more in Manhattan on the bottom. And you can see some squirrel tracks that we saw in the snow in the park recently as well. So signs, if you don't see living animals, maybe look for their tracks, for their hair, for their other things. Muskrats were spotted in the park many years ago in our freshwater ponds. That's where these pictures came from. There's this naturalist who visits our park often and takes some really cool pictures, Matthew Willis. He shot this picture of muskrats back in, I think, 2012. So just when that area of the park was just a few years old, we did have muskrats living there, and maybe they'll come back. Who knows? Possums, one of our newest inhabitants of our woodland areas in the park. All of these pictures were taken here by our gardeners in Brooklyn Bridge Park. That one on the bottom with the flowers, very cute. just a couple streets up. Possums are amazing adaptive animals as well. They live in trees, sleep during the day, just like raccoons. They come down at dawn and dusk to search for food or mates or whatever they're looking for. And they eat a lot of ticks, are like their favorite food. So that's really great for people in this area. And also, if you have pets, you don't want your pets to get ticks because ticks can carry disease. And possums are immune to so many different diseases, including rabies. So they're very safe mammals to have around. I know they look kind of scary because their teeth are like really big and their pointy mouths make it so when they open their mouth, it looks like a huge, scary mouth. But they're actually pretty great mammals to have around, and I'm happy that they've moved in here to the park. They also have really interesting footprints because they have these paws that are like our hands with these toes that can spread out really wide, and that helps them climb up trees. Some other mammals that live in New York City but not here in the park: deer, rabbits, chipmunks, beavers, they're in the middle. Coyotes live here in New York City. I just learned all about the coyotes in New York City the other night. Foxes, skunks, and then I said we have a recent bobcat living in the Bronx, or has been spotted in the Bronx. And then here's some other mammals that if you went outside of the city, where there's a little more space, you would find some larger mammals like moose and black bears and some other interesting things like martens and fishers and river otters as well. So that is some examples of some of the mammals and woodland animals that you would find living in the park and in the city and in New York overall. So now is some time if anybody has any questions. Christina's going to read me some questions from the chat.
So we have a question. Do you know what makes their teeth so orange? So I think some of the rodents that you talked about.
Oh yeah, do we know what makes these rodent teeth so orange? So the enamel, we all have enamel on our teeth, and some animals have more than others. And the enamel on rodent teeth is like a lot thicker and a lot stronger than the enamel on our teeth, and it creates more of a color to it. So imagine the enamel on our teeth is basically clear, maybe has like the slightest little bit of coloration to it, and to us it looks clear. But if you layer more and more and more and more and more on top of that, eventually you're going to see the coloration of the enamel. So it's a good thing they have all that enamel because of the type of food that they eat. Otherwise their teeth would break down over time. And actually rodent teeth never stop growing. So if they don't have enough things to gnaw on, their teeth will get too long. Like if you have a pet rat at home and you don't give it the right kind of things to chew on, its teeth will grow too long and it won't be happy or healthy for the rat. So it's a good thing they have that enamel to protect their teeth. Awesome. We have another question. Does New York have hedgehogs? No, we don't. Hedgehogs live in Africa and Europe. And 2 different species of hedgehog, maybe more than 2, but at least 2 different species of hedgehog in the world, and they live in Africa and Europe. Yeah. All right, awesome. Thank you so much for your questions today. Thank you so much for joining us on virtual open hours. We have some other really exciting events and things happening this month around the Woodlands theme. We have a webinar next Wednesday at 7 p.m. that is all about animal rehabilitation. So some of these animals that live in the city limits encounter people and get injured by cars and things like that. So there are a lot of really awesome people out there that are working to rehabilitate sick and injured animals and bring them back to their environment safely. And we also have a family-friendly scavenger hunt happening next Saturday, the 27th. And if you want to check out more about that, how to register, It'll be all Woodlands themed scavenger hunt. You can check that out on our website as well. We're putting that link down in the chat and also across the bottom here for you guys. So thank you so much for joining us again. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you again next time. Bye, everybody.